Good evening and welcome to Math for All. I'm Heidi Subnani.
And I'm Molly Vokey, and we are super excited about our guest today. We are going to be talking about how our pedagogy affects math trauma.
And we're really excited to have Shraddha Shirude with us. And we hope that you will be watching along with us. You can add questions in the comments of any of our live streaming platforms if you would like. And we would love to have you join us there. You can hit like or share as well.
Yes, yes. And I am going to introduce Shraddha. Shraddha is an ethnic studies math teacher in Cleveland High School in Seattle. She currently teaches geometry and pre-calculus. She is also a curriculum director at Washington Ethnic Studies Now, a local nonprofit whose mission is to see ethnic studies in every K-12 school in Washington state taught by anti-racist educators. She wants to uplift and honor her ancestors, specifically her mother and grandfather, for being her guides and mentors in life. So let's bring her in. Hello.
Hi, everybody.
Hi, welcome. Welcome. We're so glad that you're here.
Yes, thank you for joining us.
I'm super excited to be here. I haven't done one of these in a while, especially at my new school, so I'm pretty excited about it.
Yes, and you are actually in your school now.
Yep. We appreciate the dedication for all of those watching. She's joining us from the West Coast, and so continuing her very long day.
I know, which actually, if you were here, it would be 8 o'clock at night. So I would hope you would not still be in your classroom.
Thanks to everybody who's joining to talk about math at 8 o'clock at night, too.
Yep.
Well, that's...
Yeah,
sorry. Good. Okay. Well, I'll do it. We always like to start with what is your math story? It helps us to get to know you.
Cool. So I've answered this question several times, and I usually talk about my grandfather. This time, I thought it would be a really valuable experience to talk about kind of my my math story into math education specifically. And so it kind of starts, it's a little bit more of a sad story than my usual math story, but a really impactful one. And so, as you know, in a lot of schools, we have our gifted programs. And those are starting to change a lot, especially in the ways that students have access to them, which is like super great. Because neurodivergence is real, and we have students who are at different levels. And also, as we know, in the past, the ways that we've measured that have been extremely racist. Mm-hmm. And I grew up in that space. My generation, or I should say my graduating year, I guess, was the first year who had to do all of the different state tests because I was in school right when No Child Left Behind began. That was like when that started. I was in school, and I was one of the first groups of students who had to take the grade level tests in third grade. And it was like, it's just so important. And I didn't understand why. Neither did any of my peers. And quite frankly, I don't know if my teachers did either. But there was an interesting experience that I had, and that was that my parents being immigrants, right? There was a lot of language we didn't use. And one of the ways I think that people try to make math relevant is through story problems. And they use a lot of language, a lot of units, a lot of that kind of stuff that, like, if you don't use that normally, you don't know what that means. And so you're not going to do well on those standardized tests, especially when they trick you and they use the right math and the wrong unit, right? And so if you don't know that context, then you're going to miss those kinds of things, which is essentially what ended up happening when I was taking those gifted tests, is that I would miss those little tricks because contextually, I didn't know what they meant because it wasn't part of my culture. And that's saying something because I wasn't born in America, but I basically grew up in America. We moved here when I was about 3-ish. And then my family, we would go back to India every summer when we weren't in school. And what was interesting is I ended up not being able to get into gifted via those tests. My family didn't know about all these back doors you could have to get into gifted programs, right? Because that's, we wouldn't have access to those things yet. But several of my friends did. And my teachers ended up discouraging my parents from pursuing anything like that because they said, well, due to your immigrant status, we don't know that you'll be able to support your students in those gifted programs because you're already struggling to support them because you don't know the system. And it was coming from a place of genuine like love and care, I think, right? From teachers who were like, listen, this is going to make life really hard for you and your family, and we don't want you to struggle. And not realizing what was actually kind of being, what was happening because of that. Because my parents, they took that from a place of love and care, right? And they're like, oh, you're right. We won't do that then. We won't push this. And so then we didn't get into gifted programs. And then I was bored in math for a long time. But ultimately what ends up happening later, as I get, I do really, really well in math up until high school. And then I start to fall apart because I'm not used to the pace because I've been bored in math class. And I love math class. And then I get to geometry and I'm like, I'm sorry, what is this crap? And like, I had no understanding. Like, this isn't math. Also, why am I having because so much of geometry was all about language, all about language, all about definitions, all about proving things, all about, it was not procedural. Geometry is a very conceptual class. And when I got assigned to teach it, my first year teaching, I was pissed. I was very upset about that. I'm sorry. I have to fix this. I can see it in the background. And it's just bothering me. I was upset about it because I just didn't do well in geometry in school. And a big part of that, the reason for all of that was the language. And I never thought that I had a language barrier growing up. I really, really didn't. And the reality only occurred to me as I did a lot of reflection and as I thought more and more about my students and where their struggles are and how I can support them in working through that. And I realized how much of that struggle is language.
Yeah.
And, then I eventually get through, I get to calculus in high school and I completely just tank because it's moving way too fast for me now. Because I went from everything moving way too slow to this language aspect being added in that I couldn't handle to now we're moving really, really fast. And it's not that I'm not capable, it's that I wasn't allowed to have access to that level of challenge until high school. And now I can't keep up because I'm just not used to it. And if I had been given earlier access to that pace that I actually wanted and needed, I would have been able to keep up. I just couldn't because it wasn't, you can't ask a kid to ride a unicycle if they've never even tried to ride a bike and they don't understand balance, right? Like I didn't have any access to those things as a younger child. And so it was really hard when I finally did get access in high school, which is, as a high school teacher, what I'm dealing with a lot of. And I guess then this brings me into college, which is the part of my story that inspires a little bit of today's question about math trauma. And it comes from a place of ableism. So I have epilepsy, which for those that may not know is seizure disorder. And it's something that's impacted me since I was super, super young. Interestingly enough, the same year that I was rejected from the gifted programs. That was a wild year for me. That was also the year that the whole 9/11 thing happened. So wow, it was just a really big year of trauma.
So how old were you at that time? What grade were you in?
I was 8. I was in second grade. So
second grade, okay.
That was when 9/11 happened, and people were, asking me if my family was terrorists because we were Indian. And
I read that.
If I don't laugh, I'll cry. So
yeah, horrendous.
Yeah. And so that was a big year for me. But in college, my seizures had started manifesting in a really different way, just because biologically, hormones are very different in college for most young adults. And there's new kinds of life skills that are being developed that you just don't, I didn't have anybody reminding me to take my medication exactly on time, or to make sure that I eat this meal that's healthy for me and not the shit that's available over there that looks more tasty, like all of those things, right? Like just new life experiences. And so it really impacted my disability, as it does for many of our disabled students. Like you get to college, life really changes, because now it's not you don't have somebody who's constantly reminding you to take care of yourself or guiding you even. It's all on you. And that really had an impact on my life. And I was having seizures almost every single week. And you can imagine, as a student who was trying to learn, I retook calculus just because I didn't feel great about, I passed it in high school, but I was like, I didn't really pass that class. I think she just passed me, because I knew that I didn't understand it well enough to try to hold that knowledge into the next class. So I chose to retake Calc 1. And I did okay because I had previously learned it. And so I was able to pull from somewhat of that memory. And then Calculus 3 comes around, and multivariable calculus. And boy, the multivariable calculus is what really killed me. In that, I won't jump there yet. Sorry. So in Calc 3, I had a professor who would talk really, really, really fast in class. And he had terrible handwriting. And he had a tendency to have one example for everything, right? And so then he would explain something, and I would raise my hand and I'd say, hey, I don't understand what you mean there. Can you explain that again? And so he'd explain it again and say, okay, I'm not sure what you're saying. Can you explain it differently? And then he would explain it differently, and then I would say, you're just saying what you said before. You literally just repeated what you said. I don't get that. And he'd get annoyed and then ask me to come at the end of class. And I'm like, oh, no problem. I get that. I'm holding the class back if I ask my question. So let me wait. Went after class, literally would tell me the same thing. And then he'd get annoyed because he had another class coming. And he said, come see me in my office hours. I said, okay, I get it. You have to prep for your next class. Let me see you in your office hours. I'd go to his office hours, and he would say the same thing. And I was like, bro, I don't know what else. I don't know what you're saying. And you just see how frustrated he was that I didn't get it. And how frustrated I was, because I was like, bro, do you really only know how to do this one way? Like, what kind of teacher doesn't understand how to explain this in different ways? Like, clearly I don't get what you're saying. I don't even know what he was saying, because like it's been too long, so I don't remember how he was trying to explain it. And I don't remember what happens in Calc 3, honestly. I just remember Calc 1 and 2, and then multivariable. So like I don't know what happened in that class. But I passed it, and I got to multivariable calculus, and I couldn't remember anything. I would have a seizure, and it would be time for class. And I wouldn't go because, well, I just had a seizure. Like, I can't move. My body hurts, or I'm knocked out. Like, I can't go to class. And the most accommodating thing I ever got from my university was time and a half on tests. That was the only accommodation that I got. I was time and a half on tests. I ended up, somehow in multivariable, I managed to get a C-. And that class met once a week. And 7 out of the 10 1-week classes, I had seizures. So I showed up to those classes after having seizures, understanding nothing and having the most blinding pain in my head or my body. But I was there because they only met once a week. And I barely passed any of the tests. And to my credit, getting a C- and having seizures every single week, I'm a fucking badass, all right? That's impressive.
Yeah.
A C- in multivariable calculus while having seizures every week is a really great mathematical mind there, okay? I'm just saying, if one of my students did that, I would be like, you are a rock star. Way to go. And like the reality was the university said, this isn't a high enough grade for you to continue on into linear algebra. So we need you to retake the class.
Unbelievable.
And I said, I hear what you're saying, and I don't disagree. I don't think that my skills are strong enough to do well in linear algebra. I would like to retake the class. I can't afford to do that. It's cost me, like each class, it was only a 3-credit class, but it cost me like $5,000 to take that 3-credit class. I was 19. I didn't have $5,000 and I would have lost my scholarship. And so I was like, what other option do I have? And they're like, well, you can drop your math major. You don't need those classes. You're doing a double major. You don't need to do that. Just drop the math major. And I was like, but I like math. I want to have a math major. And they said, sorry, you're going to have to
What was your other major?
Education.
Okay.
Yeah. And they were like, you're doing fine in your other classes. I'm like, yeah, because they're easy. And like, just, this isn't, I like teaching. My passion is math. I want to continue doing my passion. That's something that I really am interested in. I want to learn more. I want to learn more deeply.
But I'm so confused. If you were planning on being a high school math teacher, what?
Right. So that's where it gets nasty, in my opinion. And it is that they suggested that I just teach elementary school. I was 19. So of course I said, oh, okay. Because what has the system taught me so far? They're saying it from a place of loving and care. And if they're saying it, and they're saying it's what they think is best for me, and they think that that's going to make my life better, and whatever else, then I should believe them, because they must have my best interests at heart, because they're not doing this maliciously. And so I did what my parents did, what I saw happen when I was a child, right? And that was to say, you're right. I do like kids. I hate kids, but I do not. I tried teaching in elementary school. It was the worst thing ever. I do not like it. Kids are cute, but
no,
not my thing. And yeah. So
what happened? And now I'm like on the edge of my seat. Like, obviously something happened, because you're a high school math teacher.
Yeah. Well, a lot of this comes. I gamed the system. I woke up. I realized that the system wasn't going to support me, and I needed to break through it. And I graduated with a math minor. And because I didn't, I had this extra space now without the major, I got a psych minor. So I did a lot of child development and youth development courses. So I have a psychology minor. And then I got my degree in K through 8 education instead of secondary math. And at that point, when I did graduate, I was like, I don't think I want to be a teacher, because I was teaching younger students content I didn't really care about. And I was like, I probably just don't, I guess teaching really isn't my thing. And so I stopped doing it. And I wasn't qualified for anything else at that point, because my entire life, all of the things on my resume were all about teaching, because I loved teaching math, and that's all I did. And so I went and worked for the YMCA for a few years, and was extremely miserable, very unhappy, did not enjoy what I was doing, but got a paycheck and was, looking for what the next thing was going to be. And, you're in your early 20s and you get into this headspace of like, I guess the next thing is just go up the ladder of wherever I'm at, even if I'm unhappy. Like, maybe I just, can get to a high enough rank where I can work a 9 to 5 and do a hobby that's more fun or more interesting. And then one day, one of my friends, he said to me, like, why are you kidding yourself? You work with, he had kids, and I would help them with their math homework sometime. And I would just light up and get so excited to support them. And he was like, you clearly love teaching math. Like, who are you kidding yourself? Stop doing this. Go back to grad school, go and get your degree in math. Just, go do this, go do what you want. You clearly love this. And stop telling yourself that because somebody told you something that you have to live up to that. And so I'm forever grateful to that person who's no longer in my life, but that moment was really critical for me. And I applied for grad school for a master's in teaching program. I applied to their master's in teaching elementary program because that's all my degrees and everything were in. And then I got in and I was like, hey, so I kind of want to teach middle school. I kind of want to teach math in middle school. So then I got my middle school math endorsement. And then I was like, oh, you know what? I don't really like these middle schoolers. Like, I think I'm just going to go ahead and get the secondary one. And just slid my way into a secondary endorsement without having to jump through any of the hoops. Took an extra few math classes outside of outside of school through community college to get the actual to make sure that I had enough credits to get the secondary endorsement, which I did.
Yeah.
And that's how I ended up. I was at Garfield High School for 4 years, and this is my first year now here at Cleveland High School. And I love my job. I wake up and I'm happy every single day. I love what I do every single day. I see the kids. I see those kids who were told those things that I was told.
Mm-hmm.
And I catch myself. I catch myself telling kids what I think is best.
Mm.
Just like everybody in my life tried to tell me what they thought was best and what would be easiest for me, which resulted in my unhappiness. Mm-hmm. And when I finally took the road that was not the easiest, but a rather complicated and messy and dirty road, every day I wake up and I'm hella happy.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm happy to be here at 5:30 in the afternoon. So that's my math story.
That is quite a story.
I love that, like the hard, messy parts. I think that's, you know, Molly and I have, well, she has older teens and I have young teen and almost a teen, and that it's okay to have the hard, messy part. Like that's part of how we learn and like how we help our children or the kids in our classrooms, or, you know, like grow and move through that. Like it's not about taking all the hard stuff away.
No, I mean, hard stuff is there all the time. It's you never escape the hard stuff. There's always going to be something hard lurking around the corner. And teenagers, so much stuff is hard as teenagers, no matter who you are. Being a teenager is hard. Wow. Yeah. That's a long math story. Like I mean, not in how you told it, just your perseverance is quite incredible, even though you kind of found yourself in spots where you were not persevering down that road. Interesting.
I mean, most people would have been like, okay.
Yeah. Right.
I thought I did say that, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, but
a few times, right?
Yeah.
You know,
I thought so.
It kept coming back, and, you know, it was not, I think in many ways it was other people putting barriers in the way. Not even so much that you say no, but it more
the structures.
Yeah.
The structures were the barriers. And,
yeah.
And I mean, some of it was people.
But the weird part about it, right, it was that the people never did it like to create a barrier or to prevent me from doing it. And that's the weird thing about that's why racism and ableism are more systemic than they are interpersonal. And I don't think people think about that. And when people are saying you're being, you know, like you're being racist or that's ableist or whatever else, right? Like the point is to say that look at the system you're engaging with right now, because person to person, the impact, you know, the intent can be comforted by that, right? Like the impact can be lessened when you talk about intent and you think about relationship and the reason, like all of that. When you think about all those things, the impact can be okay and can be addressed and changed, but systemically it can't. And that's the part that people miss, is that when you engage with ableism through a system, it allows you to be a scapegoat, and it allows you to say, well, it's not me, it's the system. But like that professor, he didn't have to say that, no, you can't take my class again.
Right.
The professor could have said, no, I don't know what the system, you know, I don't know what the process of the school is, but like I will, I'll let you audit my class where you can sit in and you can relearn the material and like I'll support.
Or here's a scholarship, take the class again.
Right. Right. But that's not necessarily something that's in the professor's hands, right? Yeah. But auditing a class and allowing somebody to come and sit in your class is something that's in your hands and saying like, you can take the next class because you've taken this one twice now. And so I feel like you're going to be ready, because what is in his hand is to write a thing that says, no, this student can take your class even though she didn't meet that requirement. That's something that's in the professor's hand. And if he didn't feel comfortable doing that based on my learning, he could have allowed me to audit the class and retake it. But that was not a thought that occurred to him, or that he didn't think that was an option, right? And that's the other issue, is that people believe the system holds them.
Oh, for sure.
When it's the reality is that you are actually upholding the system. The system has no legs. It's people that hold it up. If people stop holding it, it would crash and break.
Absolutely.
Well, I think we need to get to this, because I think we're heading there anyways, right? So how does pedagogy affect mathematical trauma?
Yeah, this is a question that's been on my mind. A big part of the reasons that I transferred schools was about being able to live in this world and really focus in on supporting students and myself in this way. This is closer to home. This school is closer to home. And the culture in the school is already a space where I don't feel triggered in my trauma. And my last school didn't necessarily feel that way. And so this question's been on my mind because of last several years, I suppose, I had been working to develop an ethnic studies math course. And I think I did a decent job at it, although systemically it was, whatever the district wanted to call it. I remember I ran into so many sad situations with that class. One of them being that students were really excited to take the class, and the class was, advertised as a class that centered students of color and focused on applications. And applications dealing with issues of resistance and liberation, of indigeneity, of identity, of power and oppression, of reflection, of action, all those ethnic studies themes, right? That was what the class's focus was on. And students were really excited to look at math in that way. And then registration happened, and all these kids signed up. And then suddenly all these kids' names are off the list. And I thought, what happened? And systemically, there were some folks who had control over registrations and whatnot, and said, all these students took honors classes this year. I don't know why they would sign up for your class, so I took them out. And when I was trying to get it to happen and say, no, we're not. This is not a remedial class. This is just their option for students, because Algebra 2 isn't a graduation requirement, but a third year of math is a requirement. So let's get these kids to take a class like this to learn more. I partnered up with a local community college so that it could be a graduation pathway for our state, because college and high school is a graduation pathway. So students who didn't pass the state standardized test or didn't score high enough for, whatever else, they had a way to get college credits for it. And the response was, here's the thing, if you sell it like it's some kind of college course, and I'm speaking a quote from, I'll just say a superior. And they said, if those white kids walk into that room and they see all those black students, they're going to assume that this class is a remedial class and walk right out and ask to be transferred out. And that's a reality. That is a true statement that would have happened. That's not a lie. But that doesn't mean it's okay, even if you acknowledge that. And that's that systemic thing, right? All of those things happen, and it made me start thinking about mathematical trauma, because why would those experiences start happening? I had a student this year, which I just thought was like a really good moment, a student who we just switched all of our pre-calculus classes over to honors because we realized that the curriculum we were teaching here at the school was so much more challenging than curriculum at other schools. And I have taught this curriculum before, or this class before at my old school, and like we were offering honors credits for less work than we were offering regular credit here. And so, honors means nothing in that regard. And
Right.
this, again, it's just creating this weird mathematical trauma with these weird designations that mean nothing. One of my students, he was working on his assignment, and he said, "Is this the right answer?" And I said, "Well, what do you think?" And he goes, "Well, I don't know." And I was like, "Okay, well, explain to me how you got your answer." And he explains all the way through, and it makes, it's making perfect sense. Everything makes sense. And I'm like, "Okay, so does your answer make sense?" And he goes, I don't know. Does it make sense? Like, oh, and he starts getting really stressed out, right? And I'm like, "Okay, so take a deep breath. And I want you to ask yourself this question. Why do you feel like you can't be certain of a problem being correct?" And he just sat there and he was like, "Nobody's ever asked me that question." And I said, "Have you experienced in the past that often when you ask if something is right, the response is no?" And he said, "I don't know." And I talked to him and I was like, because here's what I'm seeing is happening is your confidence is getting in the way of you being correct, because he was correct. And then when I asked him to support his answer, he erased everything.
Yep.
It's so crazy, right? Like, I have seen that so many times, and the erasing is vigorous.
Yeah.
Paper ripping erasing.
Yeah.
Because
And
you asked a question and that created doubt.
exactly. And it's just asking a question, just saying, "How do you know?" Or "Are you sure?" Like, "Tell me more. Why are you feeling?" Like, asking and not just responding. This is where the pedagogy comes in, right? Of how our pedagogy actually creates mathematical trauma for our students. When we just give answers, we just say yes or no, we're creating a neural connection for students, right? Which is, if my answer is right, the teacher will say good. My answer is right, the teacher will say yes. If my answer is right, the teacher leaves me alone.
Mm-hmm.
And when my answers are incorrect, that's when the teacher sits down and works with me. That's when the teacher says no, or says try again, or when they pause and look, I must have done something wrong. And I saw it happen, not with this student, but a different student later, where he was doing the steps and he raised his hands and he was like, "Can you help me with this? I'm getting really stuck." And I was like, "Sure, talk me through what you're doing." And it was a really, it was nothing to do with what we were actually learning. I think it was about like piecewise functions. I think that's what we were doing. And he started doing it, and he would look up every time, and I would just say, "Okay, keep going. Let's see where you get to." And he got so upset. I was like, "Whoa, what happened?" And he was like, "I'm doing this and it's going by so quickly. And like, I don't understand what I'm doing wrong because I keep getting the same answer." And I was like, "Can you tell me why you think you're wrong?" He wasn't wrong.
Right.
And he kept getting the right answer, and it was getting it really quickly every time. And I paused and I said, "Have you ever thought about the way that math class may have caused you trauma? In that you're telling yourself there's no way that I can be right because I must struggle in math class. If I don't struggle, I must not be doing it right." And that's not a question we ask ourselves a lot of, because we usually bring up the other side of it, right? We tend to focus on students that rush through work. And how do we get them to engage? There's that big phrase, right? Productive struggle.
Yeah.
And we talk about that a lot. And productive struggle sits on both ends, but we only ever talk about the one side, right? We always talk about the students who rush through and they can't get themselves to sit in the struggle, or the students who give up. But what about the students who understand it and can't believe that they understood something? Because I've graded many a test that has just shitloads of scribbles crossed out through holes for the ripping through. And the kid knew the answer. And they just can't believe it. And they have absolute like mental breakdowns. And it's all this idea of like it must be self-inflicted, right? We think about trauma as being something that's like personal. But we are not, you know, and again, we are not therapists and counselors, right? That's not what we do as math educators. It's not part of our role. We're not here to fix our students. But what we can do is talk about mathematical trauma and actually think and speak with our students and talk to them about the feeling, right? Talk to them about feelings and emotions associated with math. Because that's not something we do a lot, right? When we think of math, when we think about, oh, how do we, you know, like change math up? Everyone's like, application, let's talk about money.
Everybody loves money.
Right. Oh, okay. You know, we're going to talk about like, let's talk about trauma porn. Let's talk about all of the bad things that happen in the world and make stats about them.
Right.
See, this is I find this to be so interesting because I've been thinking a lot about not necessarily like, I guess, yes, it's trauma, just not labeling it that way, but how to not create trauma in a classroom, right? Or how to repair existing trauma for kids, but I never even occurred to me to talk about it. Like, and I'm going to set up my classroom this way, and we're going to talk about everything, and everybody's going to be heard, and we're going to do these routines that make sure that we are exposing misconceptions and understandings, and everyone is going to be able to feel really comfortable talking about everything in my classroom. But it never even occurred to me that maybe we should actually talk about the trauma and use the word trauma.
Well, when you were talking, it made me think of, you know, we get so proud of the standards for mathematical practice and the persevere in problem solving. And I am beginning to just think more and more that I just have a problem with that one in particular. Because it continues the idea that like perseverance, that's often related to traumatic events. It's not like that, those two words, this is not a fully formed thought, but those two words are trauma and perseverance often go together, or perseverance often goes with a bad experience.
That's what's the word they use for that? Oh God, it's not. There's a word. I know what you're saying. Right. It's on the tip of my tongue.
Yeah. Right, but that's so true, and I think in one person's classroom, perseverance can look one way, and children may not feel traumatized by it, but in another classroom, perseverance, the expectation of perseverance is different. Just we'll keep trying right. Without any additional steps involved to like, okay, let's look at why you're stuck. Like here you are describing the exact thing, right?
Yeah.
I agree.
I don't know. I'm like stuck on that thought of like, I'm not sure that that's the word we want.
Right.
I'm not sure that's actually.
I'm wondering what the right word would be.
Persevere problem solve means that I don't take a break from that. It right. Like I'm beginning to think that way. Like,
oh gosh. That would never work for me. Bricks
right? I mean, like,
necessary for my head.
and it's not really what people working on big math problems or problems that like big systemic things, you don't have laser like focus that you never think about or do anything else.
Right.
But we apply that in the classroom setting of, oh, well, we want you to persevere in problem solving. Well, what if your problems suck? What
That's a good point. That's a good point. I don't want to persevere on this question. It's not interesting. I don't want to persevere on this. That's a good point.
I think we whip that one out in times when maybe we are, as the educators, not as thoughtful, maybe, or not as planned, or just I don't know. I'm beginning to have a problem with that language kind of in general.
Yeah, I think the intent of that one is better than the phrase they use, maybe.
Well, and I guess when I'm thinking about some of the ways that like that trauma gets addressed in my classroom is not it's not a one-off thing, right? It's not a this is the structure we use to solve trauma, or this is the lesson that we do to talk about it.
Yeah, one time at the beginning of the year.
Yeah.
And part of it is the beginning of the year when we set up the culture in your classroom, right? Because there's no way that I could talk to my student and use the word trauma if we didn't have that culture of care in our classroom. One of the things that I do at the beginning of the year with my students, and I've done it for, I think this might be the third year now, maybe second, I don't remember right now, is we read the article that Frances Sue wrote about the mathematical microaggressions. And we talk about mathematical microaggressions in our class, right? And like, how do those happen? And I created kind of a scaffolded worksheet that has them looking at intent, impact, and implication in different situations and trying to break it down, right? So helping them to understand different perspectives about what's happening. And then having students talk about how can we fix that? How could we phrase things differently to avoid those types of microaggressions, right? How could we do something differently with our bodies that would help address those microaggressions? And starting the year with that has actually really helped students to feel comfortable to make mistakes in the classroom, and also have students feel safe to correct each other. And, we talk about correcting mathematical microaggressions, which is a more emotional side of the math. And it's, I only have so many anecdotes because I do surveys every few weeks. I used to be much more diligent about them, but I had, new school and I just didn't plan it as well as I did. But I'm on my second, so I just administered my second one. But my first one, it was administered a little bit too late, so only like one kid brought up that lesson. I used to do them at the end of every unit, which I should get back to.
There's time for that.
I know, but I didn't get it for that first one.
You're fine.
But only one kid brought it up, and they said, like talking about this made me feel like I could tell people when they were, making me feel bad in class, or I could ask for questions. I could ask questions, and that was cool. And I was like, hey, that's really great that this person both feels empowered to ask questions and also feels empowered to like tell other students, hey, please don't talk to me that way. That doesn't make me feel good, or don't use that tone, or that word made me feel this way, right? And it's the idea that we start talking about our feelings in math class. And
amazing.
Math is not subjective, or it's not objective. And even if math were objective, we are not objective. We are not objects. We are subjects studying a subject of math. And so there's emotion in that. And, instead of looking at a student who's feeling frustrated and saying it looks like you're having a hard time, say you look frustrated. Address what the actual moment is. And I've been through a lot of therapy. It's so good for me. Highly recommend if anybody has ever thought it's a problem. No, you will be a better person for it, and people will like you better. And the biggest thing that I learned in therapy is that if you allow an emotion to absorb into you, it becomes a part of you. And our bodies are very good at knowing who we need to be in the situations that we are in. And we have allowed students to know when they walk into a math classroom, the emotion that they will feel is negative. They will feel frustration. They will feel anger. They will feel stress. They will feel confusion, because when they felt those things, we did not address it, right? We didn't say, it looks like you're feeling confused. Ask them, are you feeling frustrated? What are you feeling right now? How can we help you move past this? How can we help you move forward? How can we help you process what you're feeling right now? Because that's what our bodies look for. When we feel big emotions, your big emotion the emotion is too big to be within you. And so what it does is it goes within you and it takes up that space in your brain and says, this is the emotion that sits here, because they can't store the math in that spot of their brain anymore, because the emotion has taken over that connection. And so they see a triangle. Instantly, you're going to ask me to find the area. All right, I know what emotion I'm feeling, because that's the neural connection that was developed. They never developed that connection that helps them to understand what the relationship between area and perimeter is. They don't know that. What they do know is when those two words come up, their brain will instantly say, remember, you were confused. That's the emotion you were feeling. Because emotions stick a lot better, harder, and faster than any thought will. Because we're emotional beings before we are thinking beings. And that's just how our evolutionary growth was, right?
That is so true, which is why trauma is such a problem, in particular in math. I mean, what you're talking about teaching kids is how to deal with I know that you're doing it in a math classroom and you're doing it in the service of math, but you're teaching them how to communicate with other people. You're teaching them how to stand up for themselves. You're teaching them to understand that their emotions are important, and also what to do with those emotions. I mean, those are some major life skills that kids end up in therapy or adults end up in therapy, because no one ever taught them how to do that. Right?
That's
for sure.
Here's just a random anecdote. I have advisory class, and they decided that they wanted to do weekly polls, and they have it like taped up outside on our window, and kids will walk past and they fill out the poll, right? And we decided a couple weeks ago that we were going to do Skittles versus M&Ms. Okay. And then somebody decided to add in their own, and it was antidepressants. And antidepressants won that poll.
Yikes.
Well, it's true. And I think this is a conversation that I'm having a lot with people lately, is just not that the problems were not there to the extent that they were pre-pandemic, but I think the cracks are open more. And like, as we continue in this pandemic, because it's not done yet, the long-term effects of all of that, of all of the interruptions, of all the uncertainty, of all of those very emotional things, we have to get to the point where we can talk about it.
Well, I think
kids are more apt to.
Yeah, sorry.
No.
I think pandemic kind of exposed more feelings for people who would just plug along before, right? And then all of a sudden now they're in this totally weird space, and so now it's okay. It's more okay now to talk about feelings, like, not to sound ridiculous, but I feel like everybody in the whole world went through this whole thing together. So now it's okay for us to talk about it because we're all broken, right?
Yeah. No.
Oh my gosh.
Well,
So interesting.
mhm. I know. And I feel like I have to like look a little bit, my research has been in math anxiety, which is kind of like the first level of that, but it so often is past that point by the time people are willing to talk to me. We might be able to deal with anxiety in younger age, in elementary. But by the time people are talking to me, or it's the, teachers that I did research with, we're definitely in trauma stage. It's not those initial anxious feelings. We're well past that. But how can people learn more about the work that you're doing?
Right.
Well, you can follow me at ES Math Teacher. I'm on Instagram and Twitter, and I guess I'm on TikTok, but I've never made a video. But maybe I will one day. And then you can also go to our, this is the organization I'm the curriculum director at, and we post blogs, blog posts and whatnot, and you can become a member there. We just did our first membership drive, and we're hoping to have some member events and all of the funding that any membership dues. It's free to become a member, but we would love to have sustaining members so that we can continue doing the work that we do. And we're going to be connecting. We're starting up some development of some math professional development, and we're going to have Summer Institute and do some curriculum workshops and whatnot over the summer. So make sure you follow Washington Ethnic Studies, and that's probably where you're going to see most of my work being done through. So.
Awesome. Amazing. We're so thrilled to have talked to you today. I think what you're doing is insanely valuable, and I wish that you could be doing it all over the entire United States of America, because it's not just needed where you are, it's needed everywhere. So
thank you.
Everybody needs to follow them and make sure that their work gets done.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. That was so kind.
All right. Well, thanks so much for being here today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having me. This was really fun. Shout out to my ancestors for allowing us to connect in this way.
Yes. Wonderful. Oh, I love that.
I know. So
we could seriously talk to her forever.
No, it's such important work, and gives me lots more to think of, which has been really fantastic, along with whatever allergy thing is happening right now.
I know.
So sorry. But we are off over Thanksgiving, and we have one show in December with Stephen Greenstein, and we hope that you will join us then.
Yes. And until then, let's keep math creative, curious, and inclusive. Bye, everybody.
Good night, everyone.